Congresswoman, passion is not a substitute for truth. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Calm, precise, almost gentle in delivery, but cutting sharper than any shout could ever hope to be. Judge Edward Chen hadn't raised his voice, hadn't shifted in his chair, hadn't even broken his steady gaze. And yet, in that moment, the entire chamber froze. For the first time that day, Jasmine Crockett's defiant grin faltered. There was no explosion of applause, no eruption of chaos. Instead, silence swallowed the room. Reporters clutched their pens mid-sentence, cameras caught frozen faces, and staffers exchanged glances as though they had all just witnessed something historic. It wasn't the volume of his voice that carried weight. It was the unshakable clarity behind it. One sentence, stripped of theatrics, stripped of venom, left an entire audience gasping for air, and outside those chamber walls, the world lit up. Within seconds, clips of Chen's remark flooded Twitter feeds. The line shot across TikTok, spliced with dramatic music, fans captioning it the shutdown heard round the country. Memes exploded. Chen cast as a samurai, as a judge with a sword of truth, as a quiet warrior facing down the storm. Hashtags like hashtag Chen drop and hashtag truth over noise trended. Within minutes, what made it unforgettable wasn't just the delivery, it was the contrast. Crockett had spent her time dominating the microphone with flourish, with volume, with sharp digs meant to humiliate. But here was Chen, rooted in stillness, delivering not a monologue, but a single surgical strike. In an age of endless noise, silence paired with precision had never felt more powerful. Viewers watching from home described chills racing down their spines. Comment sections overflowed with words like finally, dignity, representation. For progressives, for immigrants, for those who had felt belittled or dismissed. Chen's restraint was more than an argument, it was a statement of identity, a validation of being heard without having to shout. One man, one sentence, and the room went dead silent. But this wasn't just a story about a mic drop. It wasn't a lucky line or a random slip in the script of politics. It was the collision of two worlds, noise against composure, arrogance against truth. And to understand how this moment became inevitable, how Chen's calm fire was forged long before that day, we have to rewind. The stage was set like a theater of democracy, cameras trained on every gesture, microphones amplifying every word, millions watching from living rooms and phone screens across the nation. This wasn't just another committee meeting. It was spectacle disguised as process, a hearing broadcast live with the intensity of primetime drama. And at its center stood two figures destined to collide: Jasmine Crockett, armed with bravado and volume, and Judge Edward Chen, a man known less for fiery speeches and more for the quiet gravity of his presence. For Crockett, the moment was opportunity. With her sharp tongue and flair for the dramatic, she relished the attention. She leaned into the microphone, voice rising, interruptions, spilling one after another, cutting off colleagues, challenging witnesses with rapid-fire jabs. She wasn't just addressing the committee. She was addressing the country, determined to dominate the narrative. Her words carried the cadence of a practiced performer, every insult laced with an undertone of superiority. She was playing, too, the gallery, believing that sheer energy could overwhelm truth. But the hearing wasn't a stage designed solely for her. It was about questions that cut to the heart of American identity: justice, equality, the very balance of law and representation. The issues being debated resonated far beyond Capitol Hill. They struck chords in immigrant households and working-class families, in young progressives searching for leaders who embodied integrity instead of theatrics. It wasn't simply political, it was cultural. It was personal. Judge Chen's presence in that room symbolized something larger than a witness on the stand. As one of the few Asian American federal judges to rise to such prominence, his story embodied resilience and representation. His calm demeanor wasn't detachment, it was discipline. The result of decades spent navigating a system where composure was often the only shield against dismissal. To some, he was just another official. To many others, he represented validation. proof that dignity could hold its own in spaces long dominated by arrogance. And that was what made the clash inevitable. Crockett's voice grew louder, her interruptions more pointed, each attempt designed to corner and belittle. She smirked at her own barbs, playing to the cameras as if the debate were already won. But beneath the bluster, something was building. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste. Staffers shifted in their seats, reporters leaned forward, and viewers at home tweeted furiously, sensing the crackle of electricity in the air. It wasn't just about words anymore. It was about what those words represented. Crockett's defiance spoke to a tradition of using volume as power, drowning out opposition through spectacle. Chen's silence, by contrast, became its own form of resistance, a steady heartbeat against the noise. Each time she cut across him, each time she tried to derail his answers, the anticipation mounted. Everyone watching felt at that sense that the confrontation was heading toward a line that couldn't be walked back. Social media feeds began to buzz even before the climax. Clips of Crockett's interruptions circulated in real time, sparking debate threads. Was she exposing injustice or just grandstanding? Was Chen being evasive or was he embodying patience? The polarization was sharp, but the audience knew one thing for certain: something was about to break. Everyone watching knew something big was about to happen. You could see it in the restless shifting of the crowd, hear it in the clipped tones of Crockett's voice, feel it in the quiet strength behind Chen's eyes. The storm was gathering, and the question wasn't if it would hit, but when. And when it did, it would leave the nation stunned. Jasmine Crockett was no stranger to the spotlight. For years, she had cultivated a reputation as one of the most fiery, unapologetic voices in American politics. She prided herself on being quick on her feet, sharp with her tongue, and unafraid to cut down opponents with a single biting remark. To her supporters, she was fearless, a fighter who wouldn't back down, who matched aggression with aggression. To her critics, she was reckless, unrestrained, and too often more focused on spectacle than substance. What made Crockett stand out was her willingness to charge headfirst into conflict. Where others hesitated, she leaped. She thrived on heated exchanges, understanding that viral moments often mattered more than nuanced policy debates. Her career had been dotted with clips that trended for days, moments where she shouted down opponents, moments where she coined barbed one-liners, moments where she seemed less concerned with facts than with winning the soundbite war. That strategy worked, at least for a while. The media loved her because she was good television. Outrage, after all, sells. Crockett delivered ratings every time she stepped behind a microphone, every time she sparred with colleagues. But beneath the firebrand image, cracks had long been visible. She was quick with insults, but careless with the details that turned debates into real victories. Her speeches often favored sweeping statements over precise evidence. Her attacks were memorable, but her defense of them was frequently shaky. Again and again, Crockett's tendency to chase the spotlight led her into contradictions. Next, she would lambast opponents for bending facts, only to misstate her own. She demanded respect, but often delivered none, bulldozing through conversations as if volume alone could drown out dissent. Her critics pointed out a pattern: passionate entrances, messy exits. She could win the moment, but rarely the aftermath. Still, her charisma was undeniable. She was magnetic, someone audiences couldn't ignore. When she strode into hearings or press conferences, she commanded attention. She smiled through interruptions, rolled her eyes at critics, laughed when others tried to push back. It was a style that made her the darling of some progressive circles, yet at the same time alienated the very voters who might have found common ground in her causes. Her defenders argued that her style was necessary, that in a system designed to silence women, particularly women of color, her refusal to be quiet was an act of resistance. And there was truth in that. She had carved her way into rooms that weren't designed to welcome her. She had used force of personality as a weapon against exclusion. But the question was always the same: when does fire cross into fury? When? Does passion blur into arrogance? In the months leading up to the confrontation with Judge Chen, Crockett had already left a trail of controversies. On live broadcasts, she had stumbled over statistics, mixing up numbers that her opponents quickly weaponized against her. In one debate, she accused a rival of hypocrisy, only for fact-checkers to discover her own record carried the same inconsistencies. Her adversaries seized on every slip, branding her as careless, undisciplined, unfit for serious deliberation. But Crockett doubled down. The louder the criticism grew, the louder she became. Each misstep was brushed off as taking on the establishment. Each contradiction was rebranded as refusing to play by their rules. She thrived in the cycle of controversy. Make a bold claim, face backlash, then spin the backlash into proof that she was being targeted. For a time it worked. For a time, it kept her name in the headlines. And so, when she entered the hearing, with Judge Chen, she carried that same energy. She walked in confident, ready to dominate the room, ready to score the next viral clip. To her, Chen was simply another official to bulldoze, another name to challenge with rapid-fire interruptions and mocking barbs. She believed her volume would carry the day, that her energy would overpower his calm. But what she didn't understand, what she couldn't see in that moment, was that Chen was not like her past opponents. He wasn't easily rattled, didn't rely on volume or theatrics. He didn't flinch at provocation. His weapon was patience, his shield was composure, and his strength was precision. For all of Crockett's bluster, she was about to face someone she didn't expect. And when that collision came, when her fury finally met his stillness, the outcome would shatter her strategy in a single, unforgettable line. Asterisk. The air inside the chamber was heavy, charged with a tension that seemed to hum beneath the fluorescent lights. Cameras tilted, pens scratched, and the crowd leaned forward as Jasmine Crockett seized the microphone once again. Element's eyes flashing, voice sharp, her cadence quick and cutting, she interrupted mid-sentence, slicing through Judge Chen's answers as though her words alone carried the authority to silence him. "Judge, are you even listening?" she sneered, leaning across the desk, lips curling into a grin that was equal parts condescension and performance. The audience shifted uneasily, unsure whether to laugh, gasp, or simply hold their breath. Crockett chuckled at her own jab, shaking her head with mock disbelief. "This is unbelievable," she added, loud enough for every camera to catch. The room filled with her voice, its rhythm escalating, rising in pitch, in volume, in force. She spoke not only to Chen, but to the audience beyond the chamber, to the millions she knew were watching on screens across the nation. Her dismissive laugh punctuated every exchange, her tone daring him to break, daring him to lose composure. She thrived on provocation, confident that if she pushed hard enough, the judge would crack. But Chen did not. He sat still, posture straight, hands folded neatly before him. His expression did not harden, nor did it soften. It remained the same. Mask of steady composure that had carried him through decades in courtrooms where tempers flared and voices raged. For Crockett was a storm. He was the eye at its center, calm, still, unyielding. Every time she interrupted, he paused, waited, and resumed without raising his tone. Every time she laughed dismissively, he let the sound echo without response. Every time she rolled her eyes, he simply looked forward, as if acknowledging her gestures gave them more weight than they deserved. His silence was not weakness. It was strategy. It was patience turned into power. The contrast became cinematic. Crockett's booming interruptions versus Chen's quiet restraint. Her mocking laughter against his steady silence. It was fire clashing with stone, heat against water, noise against dignity. The more she raged, the more his composure seemed to grow, not in volume, but in presence. Observers in the chamber began to sense it. Reporters scribbled notes with hurried strokes, realizing they were watching a battle of styles as much as of ideas. Some staffers looked down at their shoes, embarrassed by Crockett's unchecked bravado. Others stared at Chen, mesmerized by his refusal to budge. Viewers at home tweeted furiously, split between cheering her aggression and applauding his restraint, but no one could deny that the energy was shifting. Crockett leaned back, smirk widening, believing she had cornered him, I mean, if you can't answer a simple question, maybe you shouldn't be sitting here, she snapped, her words dripping with mockery. She laughed again, confident she had landed another blow. The chamber filled with her echo. Chen remained still. His hands stayed folded, his gaze steady, his lips pressed in a line that betrayed nothing. But inside that silence, the tension tightened like a drawn bowstring. He wasn't ignoring her. He was waiting, calculating, choosing the precise moment. When restraint would give way to revelation, the silence grew unbearable. Even the cameras seemed to lean closer, desperate to capture what would come next. The contrast had reached its breaking point. Crockett's laughter rang hollow against the quiet weight of his composure, and then he spoke. Congresswoman, passion is not a substitute for truth. The words came slowly, measured like a craftsman laying down the final stroke of a masterpiece. Judge Edward Chen didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward. He didn't flinch. He simply spoke, tone even and deliberate, every syllable carrying the weight of a gavel striking wood. In a chamber saturated with noise, the quiet authority of his voice cut through like glass. The effect was immediate. The smirk on Jasmine Crockett's face froze mid-curve, her lips parting ever so slightly, as if her body hadn't quite caught up with what she had just heard. For a split second, the swagger that defined her presence dissolved. Her eyes darted away, then back again, searching for a foothold for some verbal weapon to hurl back. But none came. Chen's face remained unchanged. His eyes, calm and steady, locked forward, not on Crockett, not on the cameras, but on the principle behind the words. He wasn't addressing her ego. He was addressing the truth. Expression carried no malice, no smugness, no need for flourish. That was the brilliance of it. The line didn't sting because it was cruelet. Stung because it was irrefutable. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear a pen drop onto a notepad. You could hear the shuffle of a camera operator's shoe as he tried to reposition without breaking the spell. Staffers held their breath. Reporters froze mid-scribble. It was as if the entire chamber had been hit by an invisible wave, stunned into stillness by the sheer finality of the statement. And then came the whispers. They started small and audible exhale. A hushed wow. The shifting of bodies as people leaned toward each other to exchange glances. A young aide in the back stifled a grin, covering his mouth with his hand. A woman in the front row blinked hard, as though replaying the words in her mind to be sure she'd heard them correctly. On the dais, even some of Crockett's allies shifted uncomfortably, eyes narrowing as they realized the tables had turned. Crockett herself tried to recover, her laugh sputtering out awkwardly. She straightened in her seat, adjusted her papers, tapped her pen, anything to distract from the fact that 401 she had no immediate comeback. Her trademark sharp tongue failed her. Her arsenal of one-liners suddenly dull in the face of a sentence crafted not for performance, but for permanence. Her body language betrayed her. The confident lean forward was gone, replaced by a rigid stillness. The rolling of her eyes, once effortless, now looked forced. Her lips pursed as though holding back words that wouldn't carry the same power. The audience could see it, could feel it. Jasmine Crockett, the woman who thrived on volume and confrontation, had been disarmed with a whisper of truth. Meanwhile, outside the chamber, the moment exploded. Within seconds, clips of the exchange flooded social media. Door lit up. Judge Chen just ended the debate with one line. TikTok stitched the clip with slow-motion replays, dramatic soundtracks, captions in bold. Passion is not a substitute for truth. Instagram feeds filled with memes. Chen seated like a monk in the eye of a storm. Crockett depicted as a wave crashing against a rock that would not move. The reactions weren't just playful, they were visceral. Comment sections overflowed with catharsis. Finally, someone who stood their ground without sinking to her level. This is what dignity looks like. Representation matters, and Judge Chen just showed why. Viewers shared their own stories of being talked over, dismissed, shouted down, only to wish they had possessed the composure Chen displayed. His single sentence became their rallying cry, and in living rooms across the nation, families leaned forward, rewinding the clip, playing it again, savoring the line as though it were a piece of music they wanted to memorize. One sentence had transcended politics. It wasn't about left or right anymore. It was about truth versus arrogance, composure versus chaos. Inside the chamber, the tension shifted palpably. Crockett, rattled, fumbled to regain control. She raised her voice again, tried to barrel forward with another question, another attempt at dominance. But the energy had left her. The crowd had seen her silenced, and they couldn't unsee it. Every word she spoke afterward was colored by the reality that Chen's calm had already won. She was no longer leading the exchange. She was scrambling to recover from it. Chen, by contrast, didn't gloat. He didn't press the advantage. Simply waited, posture unchanged, as if the moment required no follow-up. His restraint only magnified the force of his words. He hadn't delivered a performance. It delivered a truth. And that truth now hung in the air, untouchable, undeniable. Some called it surgical, others called it devastating. But everyone agreed it was unforgettable. A once-in-a-generation moment when rhetoric gave way to reality, when noise was humbled. By quiet clarity, it was a reminder of why debates matter, not for the shouting, not for the spectacle, but for the rare instances when one sentence speaks louder than 1,000 arguments. As Crockett's voice faded back into rehearsed talking points, the audience knew what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just another exchange and another hearing. It was a turning point, a moment destined for replay, destined for history. One man, one sentence, a chamber silenced, a nation watching. And as the echoes of his words settled, the question remained, how would the world react once the clip left those walls and entered the bloodstream of a culture addicted to outrage, desperate for truth, and hungry for heroes? The silence inside the chamber lasted only a few seconds, but the shockwaves that followed rippled for days. By the time Judge Chen's words left his lips, Congresswoman, passion is not a substitute for truth. They were already being clipped, shared, and transformed into a cultural moment far bigger than the room itself. On Twitter, the hashtag truth over noise surged to the top within an hour, followed closely by hashtag Chen drop and hashtag mic drop moment. Users posted the clip on repeat, each adding their own spin. Some slowed the footage to half speed, overlaying epic orchestral music as if Chen had just delivered the climax of a blockbuster film. Others cut it into anime fight scenes, portraying Chen as a warrior whose final move silenced his opponent. The meme factory worked overtime, turning his calm stare into a reaction image for everything from petty arguments to full-blown political debates. TikTok exploded. Creators reenacted the moment, lip-syncing to Chen's voice with dramatic lighting, or staging comedy skits where passion got thrown out of a courtroom by truth. A single soundbite of Chen's line became a viral audio track, spawning thousands of videos from students, workers, and activists, all framing it as the perfect response to arrogance in their own lives. Passion is not a substitute for truth. Wasn't just a sentence anymore, it was a lifestyle motto. The mainstream media predictably jumped in. Cable news panels debated whether Chen had overstepped his role or simply reminded the nation of the importance of reason over rhetoric. Progressive commentators lauded him as the embodiment of dignity, a model of how to confront bluster without sinking to its level. Conservative voices, scrambling, accused Chen of grandstanding, some even suggesting he had humiliated Crockett unfairly. But the more they tried to spin it, the clearer it became. The line had taken on a life of its own. Late-night comedians smelled blood in the water. On The Daily Show, the clip was replayed with exaggerated sound effects, glass shattering, even a cartoon mic dropping. That, the host quipped, wasn't a shutdown. That was a controlled demolition. On Saturday Night Live, a sketch reimagined Crockett trying to respond, but every word she spoke was drowned out by the Edward Chen's voice repeating the line over and over. Even hosts not known for political material jumped on board, treating the moment as cultural comedy gold. But beyond the laughter, something deeper resonated. Politicians began weaving the line into speeches. Rival lawmakers quoted Chen directly, contrasting his clarity with what they called the noise of today's politics. One senator tweeted, "Judge Chen reminded us all, passion is not a substitute for truth. If only more of us remembered that on this floor. Civil rights groups praised his poise, calling it an extension of his lifelong fight for fairness and dignity. Activists adopted the phrase as a rallying cry for campaigns against disinformation, holding up signs at protests that simply read, "Truth greater than noise." Meanwhile, Crockett herself became the reluctant face of the backlash. Clips of her stunned reaction circulated endlessly, slowed down, and zoomed in, dissected like a sporting replay of a knockout punch. The very style that had fueled her rise, her sharp tongue, her dismissive laughs, her relentless interruptions was now the very thing that made her downfall so striking. For her supporters, it was a bitter pill. For her critics, it was vindication. And for the general public, it became something rare, a unifying moment in a fractured landscape. For once, it wasn't just about left versus right. It was about truth versus spectacle, dignity versus arrogance. Viewers who normally tuned out of political drama found themselves replaying the clip, sharing it with captions like, "This is how it's done," or "I felt that in my soul." The cultural impact snowballed. College students quoted Chen in classrooms. Motivational speakers worked the line into talks. Even brand accounts got cheeky fast food chains tweeting things like, "Passion is not a substitute for fries." It became shorthand, a phrase everyone knew, a way to punctuate arguments online and offline alike. What made it stick wasn't just the power of the sentence. It was the contrast it revealed. In a world overflowing with shouting matches, with debates that devolve into theater, Chen's calm precision felt revolutionary. It reminded people of what they longed for. Not more noise, but clarity. Not more ego, but truth. By the end of the week, there was no denying it. Judge Edward Chen's single sentence had leaped from a televised hearing into the bloodstream of popular culture. It wasn't merely a political moment anymore. It was a cultural one. And everyone watching knew they had witnessed the kind of mic drop that doesn't fade when the news cycle moves. On it lingers, it shapes, it inspires. Because sometimes, history doesn't arrive in a roar. Sometimes it comes in a whisper that silences the room and echoes across a nation. When the noise finally settled, what lingered wasn't Crockett's interruptions, her laughter, or even her cutting barbs. What lingered was Judge Edward Chen's composure. In that single deliberate moment, he proved something timeless. Dignity defeats noise, calm defeats arrogance. He didn't outshout his opponent. He didn't play her game. He shifted the entire field by refusing to abandon truth for theater. That is why the line struck so deeply, because it wasn't just a clever retort, it was a lesson. In an age when debates are reduced to sound bites, and politics often rewards the loudest voice in the room, Chen showed that power lies not in the decibel level, but in the clarity of conviction. He reminded the nation of something our ancestors carried, something written into the American spirit. The belief that integrity is strength, and truth is non-negotiable. For immigrants and children of immigrants watching, it carried even more. Wait, here was the son of a working-class family, once underestimated, now embodying the ideals of fairness and balance at the highest levels. Chen's calm rebuttal wasn't just about politics, it was about identity, about belonging. Was proof that in America, you don't need to scream to be heard. You need only to stand on truth, and the silence will do the rest. For progressives, it was validation. Finally, someone who refused to be baited, who refused to mirror arrogance with arrogance. For moderates, it was reassurance that integrity still mattered in public life. Steer. And even for those outside the political fray, it was a universal reminder. Passion without truth collapses under its own weight. What Judge Chen embodied that day was more than the role of a jurist, it was the role of a teacher. His stillness taught the power of patience. His tone taught the value of restraint. His words taught that truth, when spoken with clarity, doesn't need a chorus, it becomes the chorus. Everyone who watched felt the resonance. You could sense it in the way audiences shared the clip, not just laughing at the shutdown, but pausing to reflect on its meaning. You could feel it in the countless captions. This is how you hold power accountable. This is the America we need. People weren't just entertained, they were inspired. Because at its core, this wasn't a clash of personalities. It was a clash of values. One side rooted in performance, in spectacle, in the illusion that noise equals strength. The other side rooted in authenticity, in the quiet conviction that truth can stand on its own. And when those forces met, it was no contest. This is the moral that stays with us. When the powerful shout, sometimes silence followed by truth speaks loudest. Theatrics may win headlines, arrogance may dominate moments, but dignity endures. And when dignity is paired with courage, it doesn't just silence a room, it can inspire a nation. Chen's calm fire reframed the entire debate. What could have been remembered as yet another shouting match will instead be remembered as a story of composure triumphing over chaos. It was a mic drop, yes, but also a mirror held up to America, showing us who we are at our best. And as the echoes of that chamber fade into memory, one thing is certain: this wasn't just about one debate. It was about a lifetime of service converging in a single moment.
Oh.
A reminder that truth, integrity, and dignity are not relics of a bygone era. They are alive, they are powerful, and they are ours to claim, because in the end, history doesn't remember who shouted the loudest, it remembers who spoke the truth. Judge Edward Chen shut down Jasmine Crockett, not with rage, but with reason. That is the line history will carry forward. It's not the noise, not the insults, not the dismissive laughter, but the clarity of one sentence, the weight of composure, and the reminder that integrity will always outlast arrogance. Because what we saw was bigger than a political clash. It was proof that in the middle of chaos, dignity still holds power. That calm, steady truth can silence even the loudest storm. And that America, at its core, is built not on who can shout the hardest, but on who can stand tallest in their convictions. So if you felt the power of that moment, don't just let it pass you by. Share this clip. Share it with your friends, your family, your community. Let them see what real accountability looks like. Let them feel what it means when truth cuts through the noise. And if you believe in amplifying these voices, the voices that rise above arrogance, of who we are at our best, then subscribe. Subscribe to keep these stories alive. Subscribe so that integrity doesn't get buried beneath the shouting matches of politics. Because this isn't just a video. It's part of a movement. A movement to amplify truth, to lift up dignity.
Ow.
Remind America that when arrogance tries to dominate, reason still wins. So join us. Share the moment.